Welcome to Fazza Poetry World, where hearts turn into poetry. There are moments in life that do not shout, they whisper. And sometimes those whispers carry more weight than thunder. That evening was one of them. We were sitting together, my father and I. Not as strangers, not as friends, but as two men pretending they fully understand life. The room was quiet in that familiar way, where silence does not feel empty, it feels full of unsaid things. He sat in his old chair. The same chair that had carried years of decisions, sacrifices, and quiet thoughts no one ever decoded. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were never relaxed. Because men like him never truly rest. They observe. They analyze. They remember. And I was just sitting there, thinking this would be another ordinary conversation. Work. Life. Plans. The usual illusion of control. We spoke in short sentences. Like most fathers and sons do. Half truth. Half silence. And a whole world hidden in between. Outside, time kept moving. Inside, something was about to change shape. He leaned slightly back, looked at me. Not with curiosity, but with depth. A look that does not ask questions loudly, it just places them inside your chest. I thought he would say something heavy. Advice maybe. Something like he always did. Something about responsibility. Something about patience. Something about life being harder than it looks. But instead, he spoke quietly. Almost casually. Like the question had no weight at all. Does she not need a job? For a second, everything stopped. Not because I didn't hear him. But because I understood him too well. Those words were not just words. They were not about employment. Not about money. Not about need. They were about her. And my father, a man who never speaks without purpose, had just spoken a sentence that carried a whole world inside it. I blinked. Paused. Not confused, but overwhelmed by what that question actually meant. Because fathers like him do not ask questions randomly. They do not open doors easily. They do not extend trust without watching the ground first. He has always believed in time. Time that reveals truth. Time that exposes intention. Time that removes masks. He watches people quietly. Not in days, but in moments. How they behave when nothing is being offered. How they act when they gain nothing in return. How they stay when there is nothing left to take. And somehow, he had been watching her too. More than I realized. He had seen the way she stood beside me. When I had nothing impressive to offer. When I was tired. When I was uncertain. When I was still becoming someone. He noticed how she never tried to enter loudly into a world that wasn't hers. No forced attention. No unnecessary demands. No performances for approval. Just presence. Simple. Quiet. Real. She never tried to take space. She became part of it naturally. That is what my father saw. And now, sitting in that silence, I understood. His question was not about her needing work, it was about something deeper. It was about permission. Not for her to survive, but for her to belong. Inside his unspoken world. Inside his understanding of family. Inside the circle he protects more than anything else. And suddenly the air between us felt heavier. Because I realized, this was not a casual question. This was a verdict shaped like a sentence. A quiet approval disguised as concern. A father, in his own language, asking, is she someone I can open the door for? She matters to you, but does she also belong with us? And in that moment, everything I had ever felt about her rose inside me like truth finally becoming visible. Because the answer was already written in me. Yes. She does not just belong beside me. She belongs in everything I am trying to build. Not because she asked. Not because she needed. But because she earned it without trying to earn it. She never leaned on me like a shortcut. She never treated love like a transaction. She never traded softness for security. She built her own identity even while standing next to mine. And that is something my father respects more than anything. Because in his world, strength is not loud. It is consistent. He does not trust easily. But when he does, it is final. I could feel it in that question. He wasn't asking me for information. He was telling me something in disguise. I see her. And I accept her presence here. The silence stretched again. Longer this time. Not uncomfortable, but meaningful. Like the room itself was waiting for my understanding to catch up. And I finally realized something deeper. This was not about a job. This was about recognition. A quiet father's way of saying, I am no longer observing her as an outsider. I am considering her as someone who stays. There are moments that do not end when the words stop, they continue living inside silence. That question still lingered in the air. Does she not need a job? But now I understood, he was never asking it for information. He was asking it for permission. For meaning. For confirmation of something he had already begun to believe quietly. And I sat there, still, as if my thoughts were trying to catch up with reality. My father was not a man who repeated himself. When he spoke, he meant it once, and completely. So when he asked about her, it wasn't curiosity. It was acceptance forming slowly in his silence. A silence that carried more honesty than 1,000 speeches. I looked at him again. Same chair. Same posture. Same controlled calm. But something had changed. It was subtle, but real. the way his eyes no longer felt distant. They felt familiar. Like he had already started placing her inside the structure of our lives. Not as an outsider walking in, but as someone who had already been standing there, patiently, without noise, without demand. And that thought hit me deeper than I expected. Because I knew my father. He does not open doors easily. Not for friends. Not for relatives. Not for anyone who has not passed the quiet test of time. And yet here he was, speaking about her like she had already passed it. I swallowed the silence between us and finally spoke, though my voice came softer than I intended. She is not looking for anything like that. I paused. Because how do you explain a person who never asked for space but somehow deserves all of it? She builds her own path, I continued slowly, she never depends on anyone for her direction. My father listened without interruption. That was his way. He never interrupts truth. He lets it finish itself. And I could feel something shifting inside him. Not judgment. Not doubt. Something quieter. Respect forming without announcement. Outside, the world was normal. But inside that room, something invisible was being decided. Not loudly. Not officially. But permanently. I leaned back slightly, realizing something I had never noticed before. My father wasn't evaluating her as a stranger anymore. He was evaluating her as family in progress. That realization changed something inside me. Because when a man like him stops questioning, and starts accepting, it is never temporary. It is foundation. A few seconds passed. Then he spoke again. Not as a father this time, but as someone weighing truth carefully in his mind. She carries herself well, he said quietly. Simple words. But in his language, simple words are never simple. They are conclusions. I nodded slightly. Because I knew what he meant. He was not talking about appearances. He was talking about presence. The way she does not chase validation. The way she does not compete for attention. The way she exists without needing to be louder than anyone else to be noticed. People like her do not enter rooms. They settle into them. And slowly, the room starts adjusting around them. My father leaned forward slightly now. A rare movement. A sign that something inside him had moved from observation to consideration. She stayed, he said after a pause. Not a question. A statement. And I understood instantly what he meant. He wasn't talking about one moment. He was talking about consistency. About the times when life was not easy. When words were not enough. When nothing was being offered. And still, she stayed. Not out of obligation. But out of truth. And in that truth, my father saw something he rarely acknowledges so openly. Reliability. Not the loud kind. The kind that survives silence. The kind that does not disappear when things become inconvenient. The kind that only real people carry. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not sadness. Not joy. Something deeper. Recognition. Because I had seen it too. All those moments she chose patience over reaction. Understanding over ego. Presence over distance. And now, my father had seen the same pattern. The room felt different now. Less like a conversation. More like an evaluation quietly ending. And my father, slowly, was closing that evaluation with understanding. He leaned back again. But this time, his eyes were no longer searching. They were decided. She is not like others, he said finally. And that sentence, that one line, carried more approval than any praise could ever hold. Because in his world, difference is not noise. Difference is value. And I realized something then. This was not about whether she needed a job. This was about whether she needed validation from the world to be accepted into ours. And my father's answer was already forming itself. Not spoken fully, but understood completely. He saw her, not as someone passing through, but as someone who had already stayed long enough to be trusted. The silence returned again. But it was no longer heavy. It was settled. Like something had found its place. And for the first time in that conversation, I felt my father not as a gatekeeper, but as someone quietly opening a gate he never usually opens. Not with announcement, but with acceptance. And in that moment, I realized something I will never forget. Some approvals are not given in words. They are given in the way silence changes its meaning. And that night, silence had changed everything.